Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We have a special topic this week, don't we, John? This one we didn't just randomly come up with or kind of synergize together prior to recording, but we actually thought about this for about a week on and off in our past, back in our back hindbrain the past week to see if this kind of incubates something for us to provide maybe a different lens or approach or see how it goes. So a little bit of a new approach. And what we decided to contemplate for this last week, no, it's been 2 weeks, been about 2 weeks, was the term kenosis. The term kenosis comes from a doctrine of Christ's self-emptying that he referred to in his incarnation. And Jesus, or Yeshua, his real name is Yeshua, it has been said, emptied himself, quote unquote, by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And this can be translated into emptied, which is a form of keno, from which the word kenosis comes from. So we think about that of self-emptying. But this goes very far, doesn't it, John? It's kind of a broader term. How are we going to discuss this? We don't know necessarily, but what are your opening remarks to this term?
Well, that you run into that term self-emptying as soon as you look up kenosis. And that term, it never was very helpful to me.
Okay.
Trying to think of self-emptying, and the first image that comes to my mind is something like a zombie, right? A zombie is pretty empty. It doesn't have passion or compassion or intellect or these things. It's pretty empty. And I don't think that's what this means at all.
Yeah.
I don't think it means that at all. And so the challenge here with this terminology is how do you interact with in relationships with people and with things and with the environment and with everything around you and still be empty. And that if that's possible, then the word empty means something different here than it normally means. And so there must be some metaphorical interpretation of that word, because it certainly doesn't mean you don't interact.
What about, does it also, could it also imply a different definition of the self?
Well, that's true. That's
Okay.
not so easy to define, I don't think, at least not for me.
Okay, yeah, we'll both take two different stabs at it, approaches, two different opinions, two different perspectives. I think you're coming from the emptying, it's going to have a different definition and application. And my perspective, as I'm looking at it, the definition of self is coming on the forefront of on my end. So we'll be able to take two different approaches and perspectives on this, which would be really interesting, hopefully, for the audience. Yeah. And they can do the same for themselves. Okay.
Well, another expression I've come across in reading about it is about letting go. You know, you let go of things. You don't get attached to them. It's always, to me, it's less meaningful to use the negatives to try to describe something that is associated with behavior, because you want to not get attached, all right? You want to avoid getting attached to things, so that you take ownership of these things. And I think that's what's generally meant by letting go, is that you hold things loosely. You don't grab on, lock onto it, and then become very judgmental about encountering those conditions under which it conflicts. You run into a conflict, and so if you hang on to things too tight, you're going to have conflicts. I mean, and struggles, much more struggle.
And you'll lose what you're trying to keep.
Yeah, you'll,
Yeah.
you'll feel like others are against you and you're persecuted, and all of this just compounds into a condition of how would you say, undesirable situation for a person to be in. And I think for me, the term kenosis also is related to this business of judgments.
Okay.
And we seem to think that we have to make judgments about all of these things. But I think to me, the notion of kenosis is, well, you don't really have to judge things. That's not productive in the end. It leads to a lot of stress, a lot of conflict, a lot of difficulties between people, because everyone has a different basis for making a judgment. Everybody's experience is different. Everybody's maturity level is different. Everyone's situation and conditions of life are different. And so trying to get someone else to adopt my perspective is to me not useful in relationships, because it just leads to conflict. And so I think kenosis has an element of it, of reserving judgment on things, of interacting with people in a way that respects them. It's back to these 7 dimensions of the intelligence of the heart. I mean, respect is a key one of these dimensions. And I think respect is crucial in all interactions. And I think when we're judgmental, to some degree, we're not respecting another person's perspective and how it might be perfectly appropriate for them if we had all of their preconditions and situations in mind. But we don't. We have our own. And so I think it's a matter of not how would you put it? Of not asserting myself so much that, and expecting others to adjust to me, that we can still be different and allow the energy that exists between us to act in the best interest of both of us. If we're in a conversation, I think kenosis allows that to happen.
Okay.
It allows us to be understanding, to associate, to interact as intensively and as passionately as we choose to, and still respect others and their perspective, and not expect them to change.
Yeah.
And
I think
this
really...
is something I think we're short of right now, because we have these elements in our culture that want to make laws to force people to behave in certain ways, because they've judged that this is right, and if it's right for them, it should be right for everybody. And this is creating enormous strife that's really not necessary. And I think if we lived more in a kenotic kind of state, we would have fewer of these. I don't guess that we would get rid of them. I think we're always going to have differences we need to resolve in order to coexist and live together with as different as we all are. And so that it just would reduce this angst and this stress that we feel culturally, trying to
Yeah.
force another to do what we think everybody should be doing. And we have some of those laws, of course, the
Yeah.
sanctity of life. I mean, and it's just that a lot of definitions enter into everything, and assumptions that we don't really evaluate very often, and certainly don't accept them as assumptions. They have a way of becoming hard and fast demands instead of recognizing them as an assumption that may or may not always be appropriate. So to me, this notion of kenosis allows a higher order of organization to function in the relationship between people. I mean, I tend to go back to this term, this function of love. That's two complementary forces and a third stabilizing factor. And this is how I understand all interactions, whether they're billiard balls bumping into each other or people associating with each other. This covers all interactions.
It's beautiful.
And this third stabilizing factor for us, we humans, is something that is mysterious. I think it's a form of energy or spirit or some subtle energy. It's a presence there that unites people, but requires some kind of a disposition of each person, because we're not forced into this relationship with each other, into this kenotic relationship with each other. Since we're not forced into that, of course, we can work toward our own survival and not worry about anybody else. And that seems to negate this force or diminish its connectivity among us. But this mysterious stabilizing factor for groups of people, I think kenosis is the way to enhance this.
Wow.
So that we can not just be a group of elements organized, not just be a bunch of pieces stuck together, but that we can be a collective. And a collective has a level of organization that's above it, that's organizing all of the parts of that collective. So as we human beings come together, we can just be a group, kind of like the pieces of a automobile, all right, or a bicycle. You got a bunch of pieces, you just put them together and the thing behaves in some sort of unitary way. Or we can be a collective of people, in which case that we have a higher level of organization that's alive, that's working to organize or working to interrelate, so that all the interrelationships of all of the members are interrelationships that edify all of those members. They don't all need to be getting the same thing. They certainly won't be, because we're all different, but all are edified with that. And you have a stable group that's connected instead of an unstable group. I mean, it's probably a simple-minded view of a higher level of organization when multiple people are together.
Hit on a lot. I could just do.
But I left the self out of it.
You left the self out of it. Okay, that's what your approach was.
Yeah.
Emptying out the self, removing the self, the individuated form. You mentioned no attachment, no judgment.
Yeah.
Understanding, and respect. And the thing that you touched on with the respect for other people's perspectives and purpose, it's really important. When we're talking with another person, it's important to know that frequency and consciousness is developing their life. That is their aperture in which they're perceiving reality. And their frequency and their consciousness and their experiences, even if they're differing from you, they're just as real to them. It's just as real for them. And every time you have a belief, there's an opposite or somewhat perceived, apparently perceived contradictory belief because of the duality relationship that we have in life sometimes. And they are both as equally valid. So when we start respecting other people's perspectives and understanding that even if it is differing, but you accept it as their reality, there is no push or pull. There's no division. Because at that point, you understand for that person, that's the life. That's the reality. As well as if you don't associate with the beliefs, you hold on to them very loosely, if you do hold on to them at all, and watch them change as you evolve and grow as a human individual, as a Homo sapien, as a human being and not a human becoming. Right?
Yeah.
So
I like that.
Yeah. And so when we do that, and we don't associate with the belief system, we don't associate with ourselves with a particular set of infrastructure, then we're able to hear other perspectives that aren't necessarily the same as our own, but aren't a threat to us either.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things you touched on was how every person's individual perspective, even because it is different, because in fact it's meant to be different, is why it's a functioning organism at a higher level together, where the sum of the parts are functioning at such a great level, you know, that the wholeness is greater than the sum of the parts because of that difference in perspective, that difference in reality based on each individual in the world, suggesting that out of the 8 billion people we have, they're all different for that same exact reason. But we have this individuation, and we have this coming in of this perceived adopt to my ideas, but we also have to accept the apparent reality that there are some motives behind power infrastructure that want humanity to behave in a similar manner across many gradients for particular motivated purposes.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, that's the case. But at the core of functioning at its highest level, that respect of differences, that respect of individuality, where it's not a separate individuality, it's a contributing factor of the all that makes your unique expression and qualities valuable to produce that unique perspective that only you can actually bring, because you really are an aperture of source viewing itself and its own creation. You're really within your own creation as source, viewing itself, reporting back to its own creation, experiencing that. And once you realize that that's what each and individual person is truly doing to a certain level, you can respect that at a much greater level as well.
Yeah, I like that. I think that too, I tend to think that the greatest power of science, I think, over the years has been patterns, has been discovering patterns that seem to persist through all of our experiences with the reality that we live in. And there are so many patterns that are really evident from research and work and study and from centuries of looking at the world and taking it into its parts and trying to understand how everything works. What are the patterns that we can rely on that have persisted, even though the details have changed radically over the centuries? The patterns don't. And one of those patterns to me is parts forming collectives.
Okay.
This is a pattern that permeates, I think, everything. Everything that exists, that we've observed in any way we can observe over the eons of time, parts forming collectives is really a fundamental pattern that we can depend on, and that evolution seems to have exploited on the living end, and and just complexity has adopted on the non-living end of the physical reality. I mean, what I'm talking about is on the non-living end, you might traditionally consider atoms that form molecules. So the atoms are the individual parts and the molecules are the collective. And there's something special about a collective, because every time in science we deal with collectives, we deal with a change in the type of forces that are involved in the relationship between those parts. So the individual parts interact with one force, and the molecules interact with each other with different forces. So in physics, we have lots and lots of different kinds of forces. It depends on whether they're fluids or they're solids or they're gases. They're just endless kinds of forces that we're working with. But every time, that's one of the ways you can tell a collective in the physical world, is that the forces that you work with are different. And okay. So the forces that are present inside of our body are different from the forces that are existent outside of our body when we relate to each other. So we think about the way one cell relates to another cell inside of our body. The cells forming our body is another example of parts forming a collective. Okay. And all of the science that I've seen, my limited exposure, this notion of parts forming collectives is evident everywhere. And take our body, for example. If a cell decides that it's going to do something different that is not harmonious with the overall decision-making process for the whole body, that is, the whole body is an example of unity. And that unity is the whole collective, the wholeness of all of those parts. The wholeness part, the overall monitor of the bodily functions, is going to get rid of those cells. It's going to get rid of them. And why wouldn't we expect the same parts forming collectives to be happening to us? So humanity over the world could be a collective. It certainly isn't. It's just a bunch of parts coexisting. Yeah. Because the collective has a unity nature to it.
That's the trick, isn't it?
Yeah. And so if we've seen this pattern so much in everything we've studied for the last several thousands of years, why would we expect it to be different at our level? That we are parts of a higher collective. And this, to me, to approach this concept of kenosis is key to accepting that it might be possible for this global living system. I don't mean just humanity. I mean all of the living system, because it's all of these parts are essential for this whole system to operate. That's the key about the collective, is that the collective needs to have all of the parts it contains, and it needs to have the part, because those parts are collectives in themselves. A cell is a collective of cell organelles and chemicals and all kinds of stuff inside of a cell. Even like the mitochondria, which lives completely separately and has its own DNA. I mean, and our cells have complex parts in them. And then you look in the mitochondria, and it's a collective. And it has parts, right?
Yeah.
And the higher collective needs all of those collectives parts, of which are collectives and parts of, all right, all the way down as far as it goes, quarks and gluons, if you want to go that far. And we need all of those things to exist, at least as far as we know in science.
So you're saying we have to function as a collective at an individual level to live, right? But we're not functioning at a collective level where you have a bunch of collectives that are individuated, that have more of a greater unity capability, a greater collective capability, that humanity could be a larger collective on all of Earth, was basically how we're designed, from the biology straight to the global perspective, from the cell, from micro to macro, from the cell to the body, to the populations on Earth, to Earth itself, to the universe. From the neuron itself that has the same framework, if you look at it at a certain magnification, to the Milky Way galaxy, to the galaxy itself. The network is the same, micro, macro, kind of like a holographic universe that we live in, that each bit and piece has that same contained within it. No matter how many times you individuate it, it's still contained there. That's what holographic is. And just to answer your question on just my take on the kenosis perspective, we talked about kenosis being self-emptying, but that really comes down to unity, consciousness. And I think that's what they were mentioned when they say that Yeshua had emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. But that could be also misconstrued as he went off his pedestal, kneeled down to his divine service, and became a human being incarnate. That's one literal way of looking at it. But when you're applying kenosis to your own life, and you're applying it in a rapid way, and you want to function as a global collective so that we as humanity can work as a functioning organism, which we're designed to do. Not a compartmentalized, fractured, fragmented, controlled, subset of what our current potential could be. Fullest potential is necessary for collective from the parts. That includes every human being and every organism on this planet. And in order to do so, you have to empty the self, which means you have to have unity consciousness. Which is also called Christ consciousness, which is also called enlightenment, which is also called samadhi, the aha moment, Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss, the removal of separation. And I think that's an important point.
And that, what just surprises me is that why would we not expect the structure that's been so pervasive in all of our experiences associated with dissecting the reality around us? Why would we think that that pattern that seems so obvious at the higher scales of the universe and at the lower scales of our body and cells and molecules and atoms and protons and neutrons? I mean, why would we think we're different? Why would we not accept that the same processes, the same kinds of patterns that we see both at the large scale and at the small scale compared to us, isn't at work with us. And it's just because we can't build an instrument that is able to measure that force, we assume it doesn't exist. And that seems to me to be not really a very good way to do science at all. It would seem to me it'd be better to make some assumption about what that force is and then start to look for it, rather than do something else. To get busy doing something else, try to find out what a gluon is made up of. Well, maybe it would be to our greater benefit or usefulness to try to study and understand what this force is that could produce a collective globally. And I think that this concept of kenosis is a clue.
Yeah.
It's a clue that we've been given that this is a way to start this process working. That it doesn't seem to be happening now on a very big scale. I do think we have some evidence that it can happen. For example, suddenly when you have all this fragmentation inside of a country until the country gets attacked by a hostile neighbor. And then what happens? All of a sudden, that country becomes unity, right? It becomes a collective, literally a collective. That whole population is brought together by fear. So fear is one of the things that can bring a population together. The problem is it requires threats to life and limb to get that fear to be strong enough so that a million people or 100 million people become unified, all working for the same thing.
But I would like to stress the point that if you do unify from war out of fear, you're compartmentalized pod of unity. And then you're never, ever going to have the capability of finding a collective unity across the globe that structures and strangulates unity across. So fear itself can drive a premature, temporary unity that will only fragment and decay over time. It won't be sustainable, and it will perpetuate into further divergence and individuation.
Right.
That would be a perfect tactic for preventing unity consciousness globally would be to use fear-induced unity, individualized separation due to war.
Ultimately, it would be, because its existence only is realized when there's severe separation among the parts of the global community. And the destruction that occurs generally under those conditions, it's devastating to all the other life forms that we depend on. So in the end, I mean, it is a form of unity, so we know we're capable of doing this. But in the end, it's destruction. It's self-destruction. It's humanity's destroying itself and taking along with it a lot of other life forms. So it's only a clue that we have this capacity within us to do this.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we move along the path that will take us closer and closer to a true global collective of humanity, inseparable from all the other organisms that exist and must exist for us to exist? That this can be one huge living global collective, right? Operating with how do you want to put it? Not operating with one person at the head of it like a hierarchy. This is not a hierarchy.
No, it's not nature.
This is a higher level force than humans are capable of controlling. All right. I mean, That's the whole point of a parts forming collective, is the parts interact with controlling forces and relationships between them, but they don't control the molecule. The parts don't control the molecule. Other forces control the molecule. And the forces that control the atoms in there are different. Now, they might have common sources, but they're still different, and they're represented differently in the models for reality. And so this same thing will be true here. It'll be conditions that individual humans, who each represent a crucial part of the collective, will not have control over. You have to relinquish control in order for this higher level force, which oftentimes can be a weaker force. The strongest forces seem to be associated with the smallest particles. I mean, the strong force is a horrendous force that holds protons together and protons and neutrons in the nucleus of an atom. Those are hugely strong, powerful forces. And when they're released, you get the equivalent of a hydrogen bomb. I mean, you realize how powerful those forces are. And usually as the collective becomes larger, the forces become weaker. And if you get all the way up to the galactic scale, where gravity is the controlling force, that's the weakest of the forces. So there's going to be forces that will bring humans together, all living forms on the earth together into a global collective that will be weaker forces than we have as we associate with each other. These are just patterns, that's all. They're just patterns we observe. And why wouldn't we expect this pattern to persist with us as human beings and our relationships with all of the other living forms here? And so it's something we cannot control. And I think that might be the source of our resistance to this. And kenosis is the way in which we can release that urge to control, because controlling breeds fear. Control and fear are just two sides of the same coin. The more I control, the more I am either going to fear or I'm going to invoke fear in someone else. So these two things are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And I think we might be resistant to thinking that we would expose ourselves to such a force when we don't know anything about it, because we are so self-enamored with this notion of our consciousness and our thinking ability that we can't really bring ourselves to trust something that is above that, beyond that, and outside of the control of us as human beings. Even all of us, billions on the earth, none of us will be able to control that force. And I think this clue of kenosis is one of the ways for us to seriously begin to explore that. And why not do it with all the methods we have of science? Why not? I mean, it's there and it's been powerful, and it is powerful. But it takes a change in mindset.
Yeah.
You can't have a reductionist mindset and engage this kind of research.
No.
Because this is research from the top down, not the bottom up.
Yeah. That's important.
So it's an
important point.
This notion of unity, it's as a mindset, realizing that everything is subject to the forces of something greater than it. Even the galaxies and the universe itself is subject to forces above it, larger than the collective. And to me, the only absolute reference points we have are 0 and infinity. And I don't see any reason to assume that that infinity isn't the limit. Infinity and zero are the limits of these patterns.
Mm-hmm. Made a few interesting points just before we move forward too quick, just for the audience. You said a kind of a positive correlation or a predictive relationship between control breeding fear. And you can think about that as fragmentation, right? You get fragmented as a result of fear and control. Whereas the other token was surrender. We talked about letting control go, loss of control or surrender. That seems to be positively correlated or predictive of love.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would actually breed a collective.
Isn't that the same as kenosis though? Because surrendering is like empty.
Yeah, so that there's a divine alchemy from having control and fear and having fragmented parts to the surrender and the expression of love and utilization of that relationship you've described so elegantly to produce a functional collective. So it's doable, but it comes down to surrender to love.
Yes, it does. It comes down to the function of love. Absolutely, it does.
Okay.
It does. I mean, and for me, as I've understood that function of love more and more, as I've reflected on it millions of times, I swear, it's clear that this business of exchanging modes and one becomes the other. So you have these two forces and you have a third stabilizing factor, and they exchange modes and one becomes the other. So when I try to control someone, they are probably going to control me back. And they might do this in many ways. I might not even recognize how they're controlling.
But you're also consenting to be controlled by intending to control.
Yes, because this exchange happens once. I mean, what's the third stabilizing factor? That's the hard part. When you're trying to understand this
let's
thing,
let's go over the definition of love one more time and really clarify the third stabilizing factor for the audience. Just one more time for us, John. I greatly appreciate that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The definition itself is like a reversal transference.
What does that mean for the audience?
And that means a point of function,
okay,
right? or a point of interaction where two complementary forces in the presence of a third stabilizing factor.
So like a trinity. Kinda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exchange modes and one becomes the other.
Okay. So
what's the third stabilizing factor when you and I are talking here? We're exchanging. When you speak, you are a force, and I'm listening, I'm a complementary force.
Okay.
Okay. Complement is something that's not the other one. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're a force, I'm a complementary force. So that's the two complementary forces. What's the third stabilizing factor? Our mutual awareness. I'm aware of you and listening to you, and you're aware of me and listening to me. So our mutual awareness is the third stabilizing factor in our relationship. Now, we're going to exchange modes. Well, you're going to say something to me and I'm listening. Then I'm going to say something back to you and you're listening. And we're exchanging modes all the time in this communication.
Got it.
Speaking mode or listening mode.
Okay.
And one becomes the other. Okay, as you speak to me and I listen to it, I internalize that. Mm-hmm. So I take into me your message, and then I speak back to you, and you take into you my message. Mm-hmm. And so one becomes the other. Now then, once that message is inside of us, there's a bunch of internal functions of love that go on internally inside of us. We may be aware of some of them, we may not be aware of other ones. So this process goes on at every level of parts forming collectives, okay, at all of those levels. It's going on everywhere simultaneously through all of those levels.
Okay,
all this exchange, if you can't even imagine this, how the world works.
Yeah.
With all of this. And this is the function of love.
That's the third stabilizing agent?
Well, the third stabilizing factor, I think universally, is probably light.
Light. Okay.
Light.
Love is the underlying driving force between everything. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Okay. For everything, material reality as well as life, all the subtle forces. The function of love is to exchange at every level conceivable. Okay, so it's a universal description of how parts interact and how collectives interact. And this happens at all the levels. This is why, to me, the key part of the Trinity is love itself. That's a key part of the Trinity. I mean, particles and reality, physical reality, is another part, and then that which connects them all together, which we refer to as spirit. If you're in the imaginal realm, or we refer to as energy if you're in the physical realm. But it's the thing that is holding all of this together. We give it a word, but it's way more than a word. It's a vibration, that word energy, but that doesn't mean we control it. We don't control it.
No, it's good to know.
We can redirect it, which we are doing all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we make a bomb, we redirect that energy, but it was already there. So this function of love is the key in all of these interactions. And it's at work when you and I interact. And I think my relationship with you is probably as close to kenosis as I think I ever come. Okay, because I listen to you very carefully.
And I do as well.
In everything that you say and give it respect and a place inside of me. I don't remember all of it, but it's all there.
It's a frequency transmission for a lot of times, isn't it? It's not a word. It's not the words, it's the frequency. And I think that's what the audience will probably pick up on our talks, that it's a lot of frequency transmission coming through. Not necessarily are we getting stuck on the words.
Well, because a lot is happening between us that's in this subtle energy realm. I mean, if I think of thought as subtle energy, but feelings are a subtle energy too. And to me, these things propagate out beyond our physical boundaries, our material boundaries. They go beyond that. The subtle energy propagates beyond that. And I think between you and I, those things are at work. And it's the kind of thing I think that happens when people embrace kenosis. These very, very weak forces, so weak we can't even detect them yet. And we can detect really, really small forces. I mean, really, really small forces. A billionth of a billionth of a billionth of things. I mean, so.
Wow, really?
Well, we do. We can work with, it depends a little on what kind of force it is.
Okay.
Think of the nuclear forces, a strong force of one neutron to one proton. Gee whiz, they're pretty small.
Yeah.
They're pretty darn small. Or the force of an electron repelling another electron. I mean, these things are so small we can't even measure their mass. We calculate their mass. When neutrinos, I mean, those forces. We're understanding a lot of these forces and able to characterize them and quantify them and create theories about them. And they are really, really tiny. And this force we're talking about here, this subtle force, is way, way smaller than that.
Okay.
Right? Because it's happening on a larger scale. It's happening on this collective scale of the planet, or I don't know, the solar system. I'm not sure.
Galaxies, universes, parallel. We have dimensions.
Yeah.
All these terms.
Yeah.
But zero.
Well, it goes on and on, right? The parts forming collectives.
Yeah, 0 to infinity is a good way to summarize a lot of it.
Yes, that pretty well covers what can be.
Yes, and those are the reference points for a lot of your work, which makes a lot of sense.
But to me, this kenosis concept is at the root, at the very core of forming a greater human collective that really functions as a unit. To the I don't know what you want to use in religious language, it would be to the glory of all right, to the benefit, to the mutual benefit of all. That's what happens in a collective. A collective is organized that way. And to me, every true collective has an infinity point inside of it. Mathematically, I think this is sometimes represented by a tractor point.
Okay.
I don't know much about attractors, but it's a really interesting topic. But I think of myself, I mean, inside of, I'm a collective.
Yeah.
You're a collective. Every person is a collective. We have a high level monitor that's monitoring every cell in our body. And it's providing materials and such to the cells. The cell doesn't know what our environment is like outside of this body. It has no concept of that. The cell has to deal with the bloodstream.
Yeah.
The cell either gets from the bloodstream what it needs, or it dumps what it doesn't need into the bloodstream, and that's the extent of its environment. And it doesn't understand anything about this or have any real intimate connection, I think, to this higher level organization here, which coordinates all this. I mean, medical science has just done miraculous work in understanding pieces of this thing, but how this thing coordinates.
Yeah.
How all of these trillions of cells and, oh my gosh, maybe quadrillions of parts that are inside of us, or quintillions of parts that are inside of us, how all that's coordinated.
And I used to describe that, because I used to try that bring into some of the classes, and I'd ask them, miracles happen every day. And it's a kind of I think Sadhguru came up with this example, is how miraculous it is to eat food.
Yes.
And then that food gets turned into the exact cells that you need. It gives you the nutrients you need. You replicate every cell in your body between every 5 to 7 years. And I used to always say the next step for health sciences is going to be utilizing that innate consciousness, that innate miraculous, magical, mystical, whatever you want to call it, that intelligence of the all that allows for that to be the case. And it's more of, instead of trying to parcelate it, as we've talked about many times, fragment it or dissect it out, but to literally surrender to the love of that consciousness.
Yes.
And allow and utilize what's already there that can never be replicated or understood to facilitate the innate process of how we're designed.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. It is. And trying to, we can study one little reaction at a time, and we do this ad infinitum, but that's not how the body works. The body works with all of them happening simultaneously. And we can't even imagine how to study that. We can just, we take bits and parts, and then we think, oh, we've solved this problem now. So then we go and implement some solution for the body, and you give somebody a medicine or a pill or a treatment or one thing or another, and something else goes wrong.
Yeah, because for every action, there's equal and opposite reaction. That's one of the things I learned about poking and prodding in the brain. Yeah, you can stop a behavior by doing something, but once you manipulate one part, the whole other parts shift.
Yeah, they all start moving.
They'll move.
It's like a spider's web. You pull one little junction on that thing, and the whole web vibrates.
Yeah, it all.
And that's what's happening here. And so we never know what to do. And we've gotten to the stage now where, for many acute things, modern medicine is exceptionally valuable and useful. But for some things that are a little too complicated, we can cause more problems with some of our solutions than if we just let the body adjust itself and maybe fed it better, or you know, the things that we can control,
like facilitate the natural immune system, like supplement the natural immune system. Good luck designing another immune system that's any better than what we have. You know, it's miraculous. It's miraculous.
Yeah, the immune system it's so complex.
It's beautifully elegant, though, too. It's beautifully elegant.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But our whole body is. That's the amazing thing.
That's just an example.
Yeah, and to think that we could, with our conscious mind, which is only a tiny fraction of a % of our computing capability of our brains, that we could somehow understand these trillions of interactions that are going on spontaneously every millisecond. I mean, this is really extraordinary hubris to even imagine doing something like that. What is health? I mean, I don't think we know what health is in a scientific sense. I mean, it's when everything works right. Well, we don't even know what right is. We got the words here, but the words don't really have any real meaning to us.
That's why I tell people, you don't want to be normal. That's unhealthy.
Yeah.
We're trying to make normal different here, right?
Yes.
We want people to be healthy. We don't know what that looks like, but we're not reaching our fullest potential. You also mentioned that we're designed to function like we're in our 20s for 120 years or so, based on our biological body, if we were able to take care of it, optimally. Optimally. Yeah, thank you for the term. Yeah, optimally.
Yeah. And we don't come close to that. And gosh, our life expectancy is even getting shorter.
Yeah.
And it's not just the life expectancy or how long you live, it's how well you live. I mean,
there's a lot going on.
How healthy are you?
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
I mean, and so to me, paying attention to something that has been explored exhaustively by humanity for millennia, which is this mysticism, which are the things that we can't see and we can't touch, that these, having some respect for these is important. I mean, as a scientist, sometimes I'm embarrassed by admitting that I'm a scientist, because scientists can be very dogmatic about pursuits outside of their small sphere of activity. I mean, and that fragmentation is gone maybe as far as it's going to go. Maybe that fragmenting our world is part of the challenge humanity faces now with the earth in so much turmoil, is that we need to make room along with the reductionism, the holism, for working with this thing from a unity perspective, higher levels of unknowns. Certainly, this is what the turn of the century physicists were doing. They were looking for higher order processes going on at smaller and smaller scales in quantum physics. And they had to be postulating positive things for them to make progress on understanding the bits and pieces they were studying. We need to do that too, but now we need to go to a scale that's multi-human scale. What's happening in the exchanges between us that we aren't able to measure, but we may be able to learn about them. I think the way we've learned something about these in the past has been through mysticism. Certainly this concept of kenosis comes out of mysticism. I mean, if it's something that for 2,000 years, people have recognized that this came out of the mouth of Yeshua, he's certainly a mystic, if there ever was one.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And this tip off of this emptying, this kenosis, valuing this kenosis process and adopting it to the extent we can, we should be exploring this. We can explore this. There's experiments we can do to explore this. I mean, it's not beyond the reach of the scientific method. It will go beyond the dogmatic notions that seem to rule so much of science today. But there's an underground of scientists that have been doing interesting experiments related to these subtle forces for a long time, centuries. And a lot of it's forgotten because it never gets formalized into a journal literature that's preserved. But there are certain books now. I've read a number of William Tiller's books, which are fascinating, the experiments he's done. And he's a card-carrying material scientist, researcher. So there's a lot of people scientists who've applied their science to look upwards more and try to understand what's above us that offers potential for us to interact with each other in more mutually beneficial ways.
Wow. Well, John, I have to say, if the audience is noticing that you're extra fiery today, that's because you got a new ergonomic chair and I like it. A little more zest in this today.
You were determined to get that ergonomic chair in there, weren't you?
Yes, I was. So in case everyone's wondering, John got a new ergonomic chair from his daughter and he's fired up.
Yeah, and I'm fired up because about a half an hour ago, I got tired of it and I've been standing up for a while.
Oh, there you go.
So maybe you noticed in between there at one point where I was wiggling around in the image. It's because I was trying to keep up with the desk as it raised up.
Oh, you did a great job. I could barely tell you stood. I thought you were just adjusting, but yeah, so I think we're coming to an hour and about 4 minutes or so. This is also a topic we can continue. I'd like to ask, the audience how this discussion may be a little bit different than our other ones. But do we have any closing remarks for Kenosis? And this is something we can carry forward, but some closing remarks for the audience.
Well, this is something each one of us individually can practice.
Yeah, it starts with you.
Yeah, then you can practice it with somebody who's close to you, who you can have periodic arguments with when you both get kind of belligerent with each other. Spouse works really well.
Some sarcasm there, just in case you're wondering. A little bit of humor. Yeah.
Well, because I've tried experimenting with this, and it works really, really well. It does. Not right away, because I noticed initially I would get kind of ticked off at not feeling appreciated, or that my point of view wasn't respected adequately to suit my own thoughts about how much I should be respected. All right, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But after a little while, I find that it starts to change me. I mean, in some of the most difficult relationships that I have, I've started to practice this a little bit. And it really does work. It does. It brings peace. I have to say, it allows interaction with someone else, even an antagonistic person, and to keep peaceful. But it doesn't happen right away. That's the part that sort of frustrated me for a while, is initially it doesn't feel good.
But over time, did you find that the reward of such far exceeded the effort that was put in?
Oh yeah. Oh, the reward in internal peacefulness.
And sustainable, is that peacefulness that's sustainable over a period of time? Can you sustain it more and more over as you implement it?
What I've noticed starts to happen after a year or two. You have to practice this for quite a while before, at least I did. Maybe I'm just not as suited to this as some people are, and I do have a big ego. So,
we were scientists. Yeah, we were scientists, of course.
Yeah, if you're a scientist, you have to have a strong ego. That's right. And so, but eventually what I found that it got easier. It became more like a pattern where it became easier to interact with new people or people who I'd had a touchy relationship with. It's like some family members. I find that I could do this with people who I'd never practiced it with. I've never practiced with them, practiced this Kenosis with them before. I didn't need to practice it with them. It would just be there. And even though things would get said that might have triggered me in the past, I'm aware that they're triggering statements, but I don't react to them. So I see over the years, I see some limited progress, but it takes a long time. I guess I'm a little surprised how long it takes.
And it depends on the person and where you are and what level you're ready at. And improvement, you're very probably self-critical. So, your improvements are probably vast and immediate compared to some other things, some other approaches. But yeah, this is something that will vary based on the person. And it's where the term work comes in, or dedication, or these different things. But being able to liberate yourself from conflict and reactivity and separation, this is part of the soul's evolution. This is part of why we're here, to learn and to evolve and involve within and without, to feel and to learn through experience here on this earth school that we call it.
I think it takes some time to develop a vocabulary that goes with this perspective, because at least when I enter into a conversation with someone, I the conversation goes differently, and I seem to have access to tools for harmonizing someone I could easily have a conflict with. But
that's a really great skill. That's a mastery level skill. Yeah.
But that skill seems to be getting honed as my intention to try to live this way, to see how powerful this kenosis thing is.
Yeah.
It's that it seems to just happen. It starts to happen. And I think part of it is simply getting the mind and the body, I suppose, and this functioning with a different motivation.
Yeah, intention and motivation.
Yeah, and trying to function with a motivation of harmony. I'm trying to harmonize with other people, not to be discordant with them, to use a music metaphor.
Okay.
But those capacities take time to develop. And I think that's what this delay has been, is that the habits that are in there from 80 years of habitual behavior don't just disappear. I mean, the habits have to be reconditioned.
Yeah, unconditioning. And you can condition with what we consider surrendering to love.
Yeah.
By surrendering to love, you'll be able to uncondition much more quickly. And as a result of surrendering to love and that unconditioning, you can then recondition from a state of a lack of separation to a state of unity.
Well, I do have a big advantage over some people.
Because, what's that?
Well, because I have several friends in my life who practice kenosis much better than I seem to be able to do. Okay. And so watching those people, I mean, and learning from those people helps me. Mm-hmm. So it helps a lot if you've got somebody in your life who already is motivated to live this way.
And I think that's where science bridges into spiritual practice.
Where what?
Where science, we talk about the science of kenosis, but now we're starting to talk about spiritual practice. Yeah. And having the teachings and the person come into your life, people setting that example to facilitate learning and getting the knowledge and teachings passed down to you from someone who's in unity consciousness, yes, that has surrendered to love and has learned this, and this allows you to then move in that particular direction. Yeah. And I know we can only help people get to where we're currently at. There are ways to move pretty quickly. And honestly, it's being required at this time to be moving a little bit more quickly along some aspects of your spiritual involution and evolution. Yeah. So for the audience listening, I think it's really important to understand that spiritual practice, surrendering to love and becoming into that unity consciousness, bringing the right teachings, the right people, the right motivations, the right intention, you can make some dramatic changes in a relatively short period of time to see vast improvement, to not only give you happiness and joy and inclusion, but give you freedom and liberation as well. And I would like to, go ahead, John. Did you have a closing remark?
Well, there's one more thing, is that I think my insistence on these subtle forces that are greater than we are is partially caused by this sense, or this almost a feeling of connection to that. Okay. That seems to be growing to where the belonging. I mean, there's a sense of belonging to something greater that's gentle and it kind of seems fragile and feeble almost, but it's not.
Mhm.
It's just a it's just a much lower level feeling, and it requires a greater level of internal peacefulness before that feeling starts to become apparent.
Yeah. Okay.
But and it's what keeps motivating me to keep doing this experiment.
Yeah. Well,
Because it's still a challenge for me.
yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for how eloquently this discussion went today and the depths in which we had discovered kenosis and had some revelations around that term. And I hope that the audience found it to be very useful and that this invokes certain training within the intellect and the mind and all bodies that you have to really start understanding that your freedom and liberation and your unity starts with you. The improvements you can make at an individual level are not only going to facilitate you, but they're going to have a contribution to the collective that exists for the other people that are there, who are starting to build, who are ready, who have been working and have surrendered to love. Find that divine alchemy from fear and control to the surrender to love, from the parts to the collective. So with that, I'll go ahead and give our send off for today. We will be having another topic in another 2 weeks. It's always an honor here. It's always an honor, John. And till next time,
Mutual.
yeah, it's mutual.
Mutual.
Until next time, we shall try and strive and find that unity consciousness within and surrendering to love through the process of kenosis. Until then, have a great few weeks. Goodbye.